Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me again for another edition of Woman to Woman. I am your host, Anntricia Bray Smith, your professional mentor and speaker. I'm here again today as we're continuing our season 4 series on relationships. And so today we're going to talk about prodigal relationships. And I know that we've all had some prodigal situation in one way or another in our relationships. And so I thought it'd be good that we bring these types of relationships to the forefront and have a conversation about it today. Now, we as Christian people or religious people, or if we have some affiliation with a religious background, many of us hear about the story, the biblical story about the prodigal son. Likewise, we have our different perceptions about what that looked like. Me personally, as I think about the prodigal, it refers to someone who is wasteful, someone who desires to be lavish, to spend lavishly, or to maybe have that perception, that saying that we hear all the time, the grass always looks greener on the other side type of mentality. Truth be told, it's not always our children who have these prodigal experiences. Usually, often enough, we have these experiences in our marriages. We also have these types of experiences within our careers. We find ourselves being in a place to where we're not satisfied, and the grass, so to speak, appear greener or more desirable on the other side. And so we leave our place of security, we leave our place of comfort, and we go out and experience, or we go out to test the waters, or we look outside our households thinking that things are going to be better somewhere else, thinking things that are going to fulfill us one way or another in a different location. And so as we talk about the prodigal relationships today, I want to know your thoughts and your feelings, your experience, your prodigal experiences. What does that look like to you? What did you learn, and how did you overcome? How did you find your way back into the place of safety, into the place of security, fulfillment? And so I want to take the context for which we know from a biblical stance as we explore the prodigal experience about the prodigal son. Now, we know that this young man was in a household of a supposedly loving family. We hear that the father had some level of riches or wealth, and the son come to him one day and ask for his portion or his inheritance of his wealth so that he could get what rightfully belongs to him and leave the comforts of his father's home. As I was thinking about that, I was thinking about my own parent-child relationships. I was thinking about my own relationship with my mom, the relationship that I had with my grandmother, the relationship I had with my father. And I was thinking, what is it within a child that will want them or would cause them to desire to leave the comfort of their home, to leave what's familiar to them and desire those things outside of the shelter that they know has been designed to protect them, or the shelter that has nurtured them throughout their childhood and throughout their lives. And I began to think about some of my own experiences, which caused me to reflect and take a realistic point of view on what was actually going on in that household. Now, we have these perceptions in our minds that because the father had a level of wealth, there was a level of prestige, and that there was a level of means to support the household, that everything in the house was going well and that there were no issues. But I pose a different perspective today here on the set, because we know within our own households, regardless of how we're able to supply and provide a level of prestige and lifestyle for our children, a level of prestige and you know how we're always given, and we want to make sure that we have everything that we need and that we're not lacking for nothing. Sometimes the relationships within that family dynamic are not as we would like to think. It's not as healthy as we would like to think that they are. You have children who are being hurt at the hands of mother and father. You have children who are being traumatized at the hands of family members. You have wives that are dissatisfied, they're not happy. You have spouses that are doing the best that they can to provide and still find that they're not being appreciated in the house. Sometimes there are words that are spoken that are hurtful. Sometimes you have someone stepping outside the marriage to find satisfaction. Sometimes you have abuse that is going on within the household that creates a disrupt in the family dynamics. Now, though we're taking the context of the prodigal son from the biblical text, there was something in this young man's life going on that wasn't necessarily spoken of, that caused him to come to a point to where he thought things would be better outside the comfort of the family dynamics. So maybe mom and dad, he and his mom and dad were not getting along. Maybe he had crosswords with mom that really caused some anger and some bitterness and maybe even some unforgiveness in the relationship. Maybe he and his brother, you know, we hear about the brother in the context of that story. Maybe he and his brother did not quite see eye to eye and they were not getting along. And maybe there were words spoken that were hurtful. And so maybe he thought that if I could just get what belongs to me and go out into the world and experience life on my own, that things will be so much better. I can do so much better than what mom and dad has provided for me. I can do so much better than just this spouse that I've been connected to. I can be so much better outside this job that I have been serving for years and years that yields me little to no satisfaction at all. And so we get to this point to where we have these prodigal experiences. So then we see that reluctantly, and I know that it had to be reluctantly, the father gives in to the demands of the child, to the demands of the son, to give him what he has stored up for his future, his resources, his financial resources. You know, many of us, we're on these jobs for years and years, and we have these prodigal experiences, and we want to leave this job and we want to uproot prematurely. And so we take what belongs to us. We want to take the investments that we have built in from these jobs. We want to take and uproot the children from the household that we have spent so long, hard, most of our years providing and building for them. We want to take our money and uproot and just flee for another experience, to another location, to find satisfaction that we lacked within. So then as we move on in the context, we see that this young man has taken his resources that were given to him by his father, and he goes out into the world, so to speak, and he's living lavish. Not only is he living lavish, but he's being wasteful. And he's doing any and everything that he desires to do because he has the resources to do it. And this is no different than some of us in our lavish lifestyles that we live. We have a lifestyle that far exceeds our ability to financially support it. And so that results in a prodigal experience. And then there's no different than, say, a person in a marriage who takes the resources outside of the family, maybe with addictions or gambling habits or something like that, resources outside the house, to where it seems like to the people on the outside looking in that they have it all together, that they have enough resources to just share and just waste. So we look at this young man who has left the comforts of the house, and he's out and he's partying and he has all these friends, and that he's doing any and everything that he feels that he can do with the amount of resources that he has been given. The problem with being given resources and being given opportunities that we're not capable of managing is that we don't have the discipline, we don't have the know-how, we don't have the knowledge to support what we have been given. So therefore we're wasteful. In the house, in the ark of safety where we've been housed and nurtured, everything was done for us. You know, when a child under his parents' care, the bills are paid, the food is provided, transportation, insurances, things like that. Everything is already provided in the safety net of your own household. So when you leave the safety or the comfort of that, now you are exposed to things that you haven't necessarily been prepared to mentally manage and capable of planning properly, so to speak, to provide for. So where is in his father's house? Where is in our family dynamics? Where is in that job? Provision has already been made. Once we leave the safety of that and walk into our prodigal experience, many of us are blindsided at the responsibility, at the demands that are imposed upon us outside of that safety net. And so this is where this young man finds himself. He's gotten all his resources and he's out in the world and he's experiencing and living up a good, lavish, wasteful life like many of us do when we experience something new and we have all these friends or all these people that the crowd that is just cheering us on and say, go, 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 go. And we get excited in the newness of a thing, not knowing that if we don't have things set in place, if we don't have a good plan, if we didn't think out the process all the way through, that we eventually find ourselves in a place of lack because of the lavishness and the wastefulness that we have just set ourselves up for disaster. And so this is why many times, we parents try to hold on to our children as long as we can to help prepare the way for them so that they don't have to get out under the safety net of the family dynamic to a prodigal experience that leads them to a place of deficit. This is why many of us hang on to marriages and relationships that are lacking in the areas of satisfaction or financial support, because we can think sometimes beyond the current or the present circumstances. This is why many of us, even though we have created home-based businesses and we own our own small businesses and things like that, this is why we still hang on to that 9 to 5 that prepares a wage for us so that we can build and plan appropriately. So we don't find ourselves in a low place to where we don't have any hope for the security in what tomorrow brings. I'm talking about the prodigal relationships in your life. I'm talking about the prodigal experiences that we have all had in one way or another, that the grass looked greener on the other side, in ways that we jumped into something that we didn't think through all the way. We didn't plan accordingly. We couldn't see past the current situation in our lives, and that we didn't understand that this was only a season that we were in, and that this was a part of the life cycle. And no matter how much trauma, no matter how bad it seemed, that this too would pass if we would just stay the course and not get above ourselves and move too quickly. And so in the biblical text, we see that now the prodigal son or the prodigal child has went through all the resources and he found himself in a valley of lack. He found himself in a place of deficit. And so he's trying to think of all he can. He's trying to find a job. He's trying to find something that he can do to dig himself out of the situation that he now finds himself in. So no different than our own experiences, you find spouses that have stepped down on marriages and find themselves in relationships that were worse than what they left. And you find children who have left the safety of the family dynamics, and now they find themselves not having enough to support the lifestyles that they have adopted and still pay the bills and still have a level of financial resources to do what they desire to do in life. You have people who are stuck in a job, so to speak, that now these jobs, not only do they not have enough wages to make the ends meet up, but they find that they're not being treated fairly, and they're not given these opportunities for advancement or promotion, so to speak. And so we find ourselves in these prodigal experiences. And one thing about the prodigal experiences is that we're not here in these situations feeling hopeless. I find that it is within those valley lows, and it's in those deficits that we have in our life that causes the intelligence of our mind to go to work. It causes ideas to start regenerating or recycling. We begin to think back to a place to where things were better. We begin to remember people that maybe we have forgotten about along the way. We begin to think about just how good or just how bad was the situation I was in. Did I move too quickly? And so we find that in the biblical text with the prodigal son, he decided that he would go back to his father's house, to that family dynamic that he left. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. Many of us in our own prodigal experiences, in our own prodigal relationships in our lives, we can relate. Maybe it was a spiritual relationship that we've left. Maybe we left our first love. Maybe we left emotionally in our marriages. Maybe we've left, so to speak, as children. Maybe we left a little bit too soon without really thinking about everything all the way through. You know, and then we decide, once we hit a valley low, or once we see that the grass wasn't greener on the other side, or maybe we see that, yes, the grass was greener, but the water bill was a little higher because we had to water the grass a little bit more than what we did in the safety net of our family dynamics, whatever that looks like to you. Maybe that job does pay you more, but like I said, maybe you're not fulfilled in that you're not being treated respectfully. Whatever that experience looks like for you, in our minds, all pride aside, which is what we have to do in these prodigal experiences, is to lay that ego and that pride aside and get back to our safety place, our place of safety, our place of security, our place of fulfillment. We have to go back there. And this is why what we feed our mind is so important. This is why how we process thoughts and how we look at information and perceive things is so important. It's easy to get out here and walk away when you have the crowd cheering you on and the crowd saying you should do this and you should do that. But once we come back to our mind and we're able to think rationally, once everything around us have dried up, the distractions are gone, we have to come back to a place to where we come to our senses. And this is what, much like the prodigal son in the biblical text, has done. He's decided, I'm going back to my father's house. Maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe I'm not deserving, but all pride aside, all disagreements aside, everything else aside, I'm going back. And we find that even though we haven't left a place physically, many of us have checked out emotionally. Many of us have checked out mentally. Many of us have checked out financially. It's time to get back to the place of our dwelling, our abundance. And the only way we can get back there is through laying pride and our ego aside, really looking at the situations for what they are. So we had a disagreement. How do we make it right? So we've wasted finances. How do we move past this point? So we've stepped out in our relationships, or so we checked out in our relationship. How do we get back to a place that will serve everyone involved in a better place? We see children growing up, they move out every day. Sometimes they have to move back in. We see marriages that sometimes fall apart and they separate and then they come back together. We see careers that sometimes we have negative thoughts about going to work. We think negative and we give as little as we can to that job. And then we have this come to ourselves, and we have to realize that we have to do better. We have to be willing to overcome the prodigal experiences in our life to make things right, so that everyone involved, everything connected is able to thrive. And so the son goes back home, so to speak, and we see that his father is waiting with open arms, non-judgmental, no judgment, and that the father is excited and he wants to celebrate the return of his child returning home from his prodigal experience. How are we greeting or accepting those that return to us in their prodigal experiences? How has our heavenly fathers or our spiritual creator, how are we being received when we return from our prodigal experience? How is the job so much better once we return from our prodigal experience? How is that parent-child relationship once we return from that prodigal experience? Because I find that in our minds, once we're able to overcome those preconceived notions of not being worthy or not being able to overcome this experience, or just being non-judgmental toward one another, or just deciding that even if the situation's not going to change, I'm going to change. I have found that once we are in a better place, once we are able to regain control of our own thoughts and focus on our own selves being better, and once we have minimized blame, once we have eliminated the excuses, no matter what our prodigal experiences have been, we're able to all come back together and function with a level of integrity. So I ask you, what kind of prodigal experiences are you experiencing right now? What kind of prodigal relationships are you faced with right now? We know the dynamics of our nation. We can't control much of that, but there are still some things within our own safety net and within our own situations and within our current situations. There are some things that we can do right now to offset some of the traumas and some of the dissatisfaction, some of the emotional baggage that we've been dragging around. There are some things and some decisions and some steps and some principles that we can apply right now to change those situations around so that we don't have to leave the safety net of where we have been placed to resolve some of the things that we're going through right now. Sometimes all it is one idea that we need to implement. Sometimes it's just saying I'm sorry to that child that we've hurt. Sometimes it's just saying to our spouse that I appreciate you. Sometimes it's just going to that job and being grateful and experiencing a sense of gratefulness for what that job is able to provide for you. Sometimes it's just going back to our first love, that spiritual creator that has created us for greatness. Just going back, just saying that I'm sorry, just saying that please, Father, forgive me, just saying that I want to know you in a more intimate way. Sometimes that's all it takes to overcome a prodigal experience that we may have created ourselves. We may have created, maybe we did everything that we thought humanly possible within our own means to make things right or to have a better attitude toward things, but yet we experience dissatisfaction to the point to where we think that it's better just to walk away or to throw in the towel. So I come to encourage you today with whatever your prodigal experience is, to take a moment to just focus and really see things through a non-judgmental lens. Have you really said everything that needs to be said? Have you really given it your best? Have you really shown an attitude of gratefulness? Have you really given all that you can give? Or have you just given enough just to get by? This is something to think of, because as time goes on and as the life cycle continues to repeat itself, you're going to be faced with some of the same situations, some of the same feelings, some of the same emotions again. The only way change is going to happen, and the only way change is going to serve you in a way that is purpose for your life, is if you change, and that you change for the better, and that you apply principles that you have learned, that you apply a level of discipline, and that you apply a level of integrity in your life that will serve you and all those involved in a manner that doesn't isolate you or leave you out in a place or a wilderness or in unfamiliar territory that leave you unprotected. So it's time to think things through. Yes, we've all had prodigal relationships. Maybe it's not necessarily like that of the child in the prodigal sense, but like many of us, you know, we made decisions in our lives prematurely that has led to a prodigal experience. Many of us still today are trying to overcome that. Many of us are trying to rebuild and reestablish relationships with our children, with our spouse, relationships within our careers that maybe we've developed a reputation that no longer serves us. And so I encourage you to evaluate the prodigal relationships in your own life and begin to find ways that you can make things better not only for yourself, but all parties involved. Relationships are important to our future, and how we're able to develop those relationships are key to the future relationships that we will begin to establish along the way as our lives begin to unfold and we begin to take on new territory. So I thank you for joining me here for this edition of Woman to Woman. I am your host, Anntricia Bray Smith, your professional mentor and speaker. Until next time.